On Valentine's Day, my boyfriend got down on one knee in a fancy restaurant, but it wasn't a proposal. It happened during one of those late spring weekends in Austin where the air is thick with bass lines and barbecue smoke, where sweat clings to your back and the skyline flickers behind stage lights like a memory you're trying not to let slip. I was 28 and a little jaded. The kind of tired that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from too many half-measured conversations, too many people who wanted something without ever saying what. And then there was Zach, just 30, taller than he seemed at first, with a kind of laugh that cut through the music and made people turn to find the source. We met through friends, somebody's friend's cousin, that usual blur. I wasn't looking for anyone, but somehow we ended up shoulder to shoulder, leaning against the same food truck table, waiting on brisket tacos. I think I rolled my eyes at something he said, but he took it as interest, not insult, and before I knew it, we were talking about records and childhood road trips and whether ketchup belonged on eggs. It didn't feel like the start of something big, just easy, like flipping through a well-worn photo album and finding a blank page waiting. The relationship that followed wasn't made of fireworks or grand gestures. It was quieter, more like gravity. Something you didn't think about until you realized it was holding you there. We moved through those first months like people who already knew the ending and were trying to savor every chapter before it. 3 years later, I could still remember what shirt he wore the day he met my dog, or how he leaned forward when he was nervous like he was about to confess something and then backed off, pretending nothing happened. There were moments where time folded over itself. The night I got the flu and he showed up with orange Gatorade and every season of The Office on DVD, or that one week in late September where we slept on the floor with all the windows open because the mattress just didn't feel right anymore. It wasn't perfect, God, no, but there was something whole about it. Like maybe we both knew this wasn't just a chapter. That birthday, though, that was the moment something shifted. I remember it clearly. It was mid-June, and I'd already half convinced myself he'd forgotten what I'd mentioned in passing months ago. A bracelet I saw in a tiny shop in Santa Fe, brushed silver, tiny turquoise insets, simple and honest. I didn't even think he was listening when I pointed it out. I wasn't testing him, wasn't leaving a breadcrumb trail. I just liked it. And then there it was, in this tiny box with the tissue paper folded too neatly to be accidental. I didn't even have to open the card. My hands were shaking before I touched the clasp. I cried harder than I expected, harder than I wanted to in front of him, but he just wrapped me up and didn't say anything. Didn't need to. That kind of knowing is rare. You either feel it or you don't. And I felt it. Thanksgiving rolled around a few months later. We were at his mom's place. Those long dinners where you pass the same bowl of sweet potatoes 3 times before actually taking any. Zach's family wasn't subtle, not by a mile. His mom had that kind of permanent knowing smile. The one that says, I won't say anything now, but just wait. She said something like, big changes ahead, while scooping cranberry sauce, and I caught Shane, Zach's brother, winking when he mentioned family traditions and heirlooms. Then he said family jewels and nearly choked on his wine, and the whole table laughed like they knew something I didn't. And maybe they did. I didn't ask questions. Didn't need to. Because I knew what was coming, not when or how, but I felt it in the way he reached for my hand that night when we were walking back to the car. It wasn't just about the bracelet or the look on his mother's face. It was in the pause, the held breath between conversations, the quiet glances that lingered a little too long. He was planning something, and whatever it was, I was ready. December came in like a slow unraveling of plans and expectations, all tangled up in too many lights, too many obligations, and the kind of cold that makes your bones ache even when you're laughing. Zach had always been one of those people who got weird around the holidays, like he was trying to hold something back, constantly hovering between overly cheerful and strangely quiet, like he was editing his thoughts before they reached his mouth. One minute he was humming along to Last Christmas, like it was his personal anthem, dancing around the apartment with a candy cane in his mouth like a kid who just discovered sugar, and the next minute he was off somewhere in his head, scrolling aimlessly through his phone, tapping his knee under the table like it was trying to tell him something his mouth wouldn't. I chalked it up to end-of-year pressure. Everyone was tired. Everyone was doing too much. But there was something about the way he looked at me in those in-between moments that made my stomach twist, not in a bad way, but in that hyper-aware, something's coming kind of way. At his company's holiday party, all sleek decor and bottomless champagne flutes, he held my hand like it was the only solid thing in the room, like if he let go for a second the whole night might swallow him up. I caught him glancing at me more than usual, like he was trying to memorize something. And when someone from accounting made some offhand comment about how lucky he was, he didn't even hesitate, just smiled, tightened his grip on my hand, and said, "She's my girl." Like it was the most natural thing in the world, like there was no maybe in his voice. By New Year's, we were both running on fumes. Too many parties, Too many hours pretending not to be exhausted, too many polite smiles stretched across too little sleep. January was supposed to be quiet, a breather, a reset. But it didn't quite turn out that way. One night, out of nowhere, he told me he was flying out for the weekend to meet up with his college friends. Guys I'd heard stories about, the kind of stories that usually ended in hangovers and half-lost wallets. He framed it like a tradition, like something he hadn't planned but couldn't really skip, and I didn't handle it well. We fought. Not yelling, not dramatic, but that tense, brittle kind of arguing where everything you say feels like the wrong thing, and you can feel the distance growing with every word. I didn't care about the trip itself as much as I cared about not knowing it was coming. It was the secrecy that stung, the way he dropped it like it was nothing. But when he got back, it was like someone had flipped a switch in him. Suddenly, he was everywhere, bringing home flowers for no reason, cooking dinner on nights I usually did, fixing the drawer in the bathroom that had been stuck for 6 months without me asking. He started doing this thing where he'd kiss me on the forehead before bed, like some old-fashioned movie gesture, like he was trying to ground something in the middle of all the noise. It didn't feel like guilt, not exactly. It felt like a prelude, like he'd made a decision somewhere between leaving and coming back, and now he was playing it out. A few days later, he brought it up like it was casual, but I could tell he'd been rehearsing it. He said he wanted to do something special for Valentine's Day, nothing wild, just dinner. But not just any dinner. Leclerc, the place with the velvet banquettes and wine lists like novels, where reservations meant planning weeks in advance, and everyone spoke in low voices like they were guarding secrets. I raised an eyebrow, and he just smiled, that quiet, mischievous grin I'd learned to read over the years, the one that meant this wasn't just about food. Then he said, "Wear the red dress." Just like that. Not, "Do you still have it?" Or, "I was thinking maybe," but like he'd already imagined the night down to the last detail. The red dress. The one he once said made me look like I walked straight out of some classic movie, all fire and intent. The way he said it, soft but certain, I didn't ask questions. I just nodded. Because whatever this was building toward, I knew better than to interrupt it. 2 days before Valentine's Day, he sent me a message in the middle of the workday, the kind that made my chest tighten in that sharp, hopeful way that doesn't always make sense until later. It was simple, a little cryptic. "There's something I've been working on for a long time. Can't wait for you to see it." No emojis, no extra fluff. Just that. I stared at my screen for a full minute, rereading it, my heart climbing up into my throat like it had recognized something my mind hadn't quite caught up to yet. My hands were suddenly cold. I knew exactly what it sounded like, and I wasn't the only one. My friends practically lost their minds when I told them. It's happening. Finally. Every little detail they'd noticed, his mood swings, the red dress, the restaurant, the weird Thanksgiving hints. All of it now clicked into place like 1,000 puzzle pieces snapping into focus. He told me to meet him there. Said he'd come straight from work and that it would be simpler that way. I didn't love that part. I wanted the drive together, the anticipation, the quiet checking of each other's nerves. But I didn't argue. If this was how he'd planned it, I wasn't going to disrupt the rhythm of whatever he was building. I arrived a little early, my coat tucked tight around me like armor, that stupid fluttery excitement pulsing through every nerve like I was back in high school waiting for someone to kiss me for the first time. The hostess smiled when I gave her his name, nodded like she'd been expecting this moment all night, and led me through the softly lit maze of velvet chairs and hushed tables until we reached the one in the center of the room. Front and center, not tucked in a corner like we usually preferred. It was the kind of placement that demanded attention. Everything around it looked staged, 2 flutes already on the table, a tiny candle flickering in the middle, like it was holding its breath. I sat down, my fingers tracing the rim of the champagne glass just to keep them busy. Every second felt like an hour, and I couldn't stop glancing toward the entrance. Then he walked in, perfectly on time, not a second early, and the second he saw me, his whole face softened. He wasn't dressed differently than usual. Still that same slate-colored jacket he wore when he wanted to look put together, but not flashy. But there was a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. Like he'd been rehearsing something in his head on the drive over, and wasn't sure if he still had the lines right. He kissed my cheek, sat down, and almost immediately called the waiter over to order champagne. No menu, no hesitation. Just the good kind. The kind we only got on birthdays or anniversaries, or those random nights when he said screw it. Let's celebrate something. I could feel the buzz in my skin before the first glass was even poured. He was smiling that familiar smile, the one where his eyes crinkled just a bit at the corners, and for a moment it was just us, like the rest of the restaurant blurred out completely. The evening unfolded like something out of a memory we hadn't made yet. Flawless timing, perfect pacing. We talked the way we only ever did when we were far from home and surrounded by strangers, like everything was allowed. He asked me what my favorite moment of our entire relationship had been, and I told him it was that night we walked 4 miles home because we missed the last train and ended up in the pouring rain, laughing until we couldn't breathe. He said it was the time I made him soup when he was sick, but that didn't sound like the real answer, and I could tell by the way he kept glancing away when he said it. We talked about the future, not vague, not theoretical. He asked if I'd ever want to leave Austin, said he'd been thinking more about houses lately, about space and windows and dogs that barked when the mailman came. It wasn't a proposal, not yet, but it felt like everything leading up to one. Then, halfway through dessert, it happened. Not to us, but to the couple 2 tables over. The girl gasped loud enough for half the restaurant to hear, her hands flying to her mouth as the guy dropped to one knee, fumbling with a little velvet box like it was heavier than it looked. The whole room erupted, clapping, smiling, champagne glasses raised in spontaneous, collective celebration. It was the kind of moment you usually just see in movies, the kind you talk about later like you were witnessing something sacred. And Zach, he didn't look away. He just stared at them, his jaw tight, his eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite read. It wasn't envy exactly, but it wasn't nothing. There was a gleam in his eyes, sharp and unreadable, like he was watching the ending to a story he hadn't quite finished writing yet. He didn't clap, didn't raise his glass, just sat there, completely still, while everyone else celebrated around us. And I didn't say a word. I just watched him watching them, trying to decide what that look meant, and wondering why. In the middle of a perfect evening, I suddenly felt like the only one holding my breath. I remember the exact moment the dessert tray came, the quiet hum of the restaurant folding into a hush, like the whole room had leaned in without realizing it. A perfect little dome of chocolate mousse with gold leaf and something delicate drizzled on top. The kind of thing you don't eat so much as admire. The waiter placed it down between us with a smile that felt too knowing, and for a split second, everything held. My breath, the flicker of candlelight, the strange pressure behind my eyes that I'd been pushing back all night. Zach stood up. Not suddenly, not awkwardly, just smooth and confident like he was walking into a moment he'd been practicing in his head for weeks. He tapped his glass once, twice. A light, clear sound that cut through the soft jazz in the background, through conversations and the clink of cutlery, until the room quieted like a theater before curtain. He smiled, tight-lipped, polished, rehearsed, and looked down at me with eyes that didn't belong to the man I'd spent 3 years memorizing. Then, he lowered himself to one knee. The gasp came before I could stop it. Not loud, but audible. Like my body responded before my mind could catch up. Every table within view turned. Phones came up. Faces lit with that warm secondhand joy people feel when they're lucky enough to witness love unfold in public. I could hear someone whisper, "Oh my God, he's proposing." The woman at the next table had her hands over her heart. Strangers were already smiling at me like I was about to step into the next chapter of a story they'd all been quietly rooting for. But his eyes didn't soften. His hand didn't reach for mine. He didn't pull out a ring box. He just stared, too long, too still, like he was studying a bug under glass. "I'm tired of pretending that you're worth loving." That's what he said. Just that. Clear. Loud. Like it was a line from a play, and he wanted to make sure every person in the room caught every syllable. For a moment, there was silence. True, absolute silence, like the oxygen had been ripped out of the space around me. My stomach went hollow. I blinked, waiting for the punchline, for the twist, for him to laugh and say it was some kind of stupid joke gone wrong. But he stood up, straightened his jacket like he'd just finished a task he'd been dreading. "You're disgusting," he added, quieter but somehow even heavier, like he was dropping something dead and rotting right there between us. Then he turned around and walked out. Just like that. Didn't look back. Didn't pause. The door opened, and then he was gone. The weight of the room crushed me a few seconds later. The gasps, the stunned silence, the blinking camera lights still raised, the slow return of whispers and awkward shifting. No one spoke to me. No one knew how. I was just sitting there, alone, in a red dress I'd bought, because he once said it made me look like fire, staring at a dessert I couldn't taste. My hands were shaking so hard I couldn't reach for my glass. I didn't cry. Not at first. Not until the waiter came back. Eyes full of pity he tried to disguise with professional detachment, and placed the bill on the table like nothing had happened. $347, in careful print. A signature line at the bottom that blurred as the tears finally broke loose. I handed over my card without saying anything. I didn't trust my voice. I could feel every pair of eyes on me, some curious, some embarrassed for me, some trying to look away and failing. When I walked out of LeClaire, the air hit me like a slap, cold and cruel and too bright under the street lamps. I didn't know where I was going. My feet moved because they had to. My face was wet. My hair was sticking to my cheeks. My phone buzzed, but I didn't look. I couldn't. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Everything I thought I knew had collapsed in the space between a champagne toast and a chocolate dessert, and the worst part was, I still didn't understand why. I barely remember the drive home. Just the city sliding past the windshield in streaks of wet light, headlights like ghosts, my own reflection in the window too hollow to recognize. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles ached, and every time I blinked, I saw his face, not the one I knew, but the one from the restaurant, hard and practiced and empty. The moment I stepped inside the apartment, I knew. You don't need to see bare hangers or an empty dresser to feel absence. It sits in the air like smoke after something's burned down. His jacket wasn't on the hook by the door. The faint scent of his cologne was already fading from the hallway. I moved through each room on instinct, opening closets, checking drawers, like maybe I'd find something he forgot. But there was nothing. Not even a coffee mug. No note. No explanation. Not even cruelty in writing. Just a clean, silent vanishing. I opened my phone and tapped his contact. The call rang once, then cut. I tried again. Same thing. I opened our last thread, his message about the surprise, and tried to reply. Message failed. I checked Instagram. Blocked. Facebook. Blocked. Even Spotify, gone. Like he'd scrubbed himself from my life in the time it took me to sit at a table and pay for the privilege of being humiliated. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I just lay on the floor next to the couch with all the lights off, staring at the ceiling while the same thought looped in my head. What the hell just happened? 2 days later, Shane called. His name lit up my screen, and for a moment I hesitated. Part of me hoping it was Zach, somehow using someone else's phone, ready to say it was all a mistake, a breakdown, a cruel joke gone too far. But it wasn't Zach. It was Shane, and his voice sounded different. Worn out. Heavy. He didn't even say hello. Just a breath, and then, I need to tell you something. I sat down, already bracing for what I didn't want to hear. I didn't know he was going to go that far, Shane said. But, he's been seeing someone else. Her name's Rachel. It's been a while. Almost a year. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. Every word felt like a nail. He wanted to break up? Shane kept going. Like if he stopped talking, the truth might disappear. He said he didn't want to do it the normal way. Said it wouldn't be clean. That you'd drag it out. He thought it would be easier if he just made you hate him. I could hear myself breathing, slow and hollow like the room had collapsed around me. And the thing at the restaurant. That wasn't spontaneous, Shane added. He planned it. He hired someone to film it. He wanted it to go viral. Said it would be poetic or some crap. A performance. I told him he was out of his mind. My throat tightened so hard I couldn't swallow. I don't remember what I said. Maybe I thanked him. Maybe I hung up. But I remember sitting there in the silence afterward. This suffocating stillness crawling under my skin, colder than anything outside. It started a few hours later. My phone buzzed, TikTok. Someone had tagged me. A video. I tapped the notification, and there it was. Me. In the red dress. At Leclerc. The exact moment, he dropped to one knee. A slow zoom. The audio crystal clear. I'm tired of pretending that you're worth loving. The caption read. She thought he was proposing, but watch what he does instead. The comments were brutal. Thousands of them. People speculating what I must have done to deserve it. Some laughing. Some calling it fake. Some saying, I'd die if this happened to me. The view count was already past 300,000. Another video popped up within the hour, same night, different angle. Someone else had filmed it. Another caption. This is why I have trust issues. Then another. And another. It was clear now. This wasn't just a breakup. It was a performance. An event. A finale. He'd turned my pain into content. I don't know who Rachel is. I don't know if she was watching. I don't know if this was meant for her, or for him, or for strangers in the comments section. But I do know this. That night wasn't about closure. It was about spectacle. And I was the set piece he walked away from. I thought the worst part had already happened. I thought the restaurant, the silence, the videos, that was the blow. That was the end. I didn't realize I was still standing on a trapdoor, and the real fall hadn't even started. It was my mom who called first, her voice quiet in that way that always used to mean something serious was coming. When a family member was sick, when a bill was missed, when my dog had to be put down in middle school. But this time her tone didn't carry sadness. It was disbelief. Rage. Something brittle. She asked me if I had known. I asked her known what, and the second of hesitation before she answered told me I wasn't going to be okay. They'd invested in the cafe. Of course they had. My dad had written the check himself, $20,000 at first, then more over time. My mom had helped file the paperwork, even walked through the space with Zach when it was just walls and dust. They believed in him. Because I did. Because he was part of the family. But that morning, they'd gotten a notice from the bank. Not a routine update. Not a thank you. A warning. One of the business credit lines had been maxed out. Over $28,000, drawn in under 2 weeks. Another card showed cash advances, thousands at a time. They thought it was a mistake. They called the bank. It wasn't. He'd been pulling money from the business since early December. Quietly, systematically. And it didn't stop there. The more they dug, the uglier it got. They hadn't just invested in the cafe. They'd co-signed a personal line for him, one he used to clear out his remaining student loan debt. My dad showed me the breakdown. $19,800 to the loan servicer, paid in full. Then there was the car, $11,500 paid to the dealership. And a few weeks before Christmas, a $3,400 charge for plane tickets, round trip to Aspen, in Zach's parents' names. I don't remember sitting down. I just remember my hands going numb, my vision shrinking like the world was receding away from me. None of it was for us. The cafe, the loans, the holidays, they weren't about building a life with me. They were about buying time. About creating a stage where he could live a double life with Rachel while wearing the costume of someone people could trust. He hadn't just betrayed me. He'd gutted the people who loved me, who believed in him because they believed in us. The money had gone to her. That's what Shane said when I finally asked. The trips, the gifts, rent on the apartment they were already sharing across town, while Zach still came home to me 3 nights a week like nothing was broken. Jewelry from a boutique I used to take him past, restaurants we'd never been able to afford even on anniversaries, weekends in Charleston, Sedona, Napa, all paid for with our trust. With my family's trust. He hadn't just planned his escape. He funded it with everything we gave him, kindness, love, time, money, and then walked away like none of it had ever mattered. And the worst part wasn't the debt or the humiliation or the hollow shell of what I thought we had. The worst part was knowing that while I was sitting in a red dress waiting for a proposal, he was already living another life, fully paid for by the people I had convinced to believe in him. I texted him 2 sentences. I found some of your documents. Legal stuff. Better if you pick them up in person. He responded within minutes. Short. Casual. Sure, just let me know when. He had no idea. He didn't suspect anything. When the day came, I kept the lights low. Not enough to seem strange, just enough that the tension clung to the walls. My parents arrived 20 minutes before him. My dad hadn't said a word since stepping inside, jaw locked so tight I thought I might hear his teeth crack. My mom stood in the kitchen, arms folded across her chest, trembling in a way that had nothing to do with nerves. I checked the camera twice. Hidden just above the bookshelf, the little red light blinking slow and steady. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my ears. When Zach knocked, I opened the door like nothing was wrong. I even smiled, tight, restrained, but real enough to disarm him. He stepped inside like it was still his space, like his scent still belonged in the corners of my furniture. Then he saw my dad, and then my mom. He stopped, blinked, tilted his head like he was confused. Didn't know this was a full reunion, he said, forcing a smile. Sit down, I told him. We need to talk. He hesitated, looked at me, then back at my parents, and finally settled onto the edge of the couch like a guest in the wrong house. We know everything, my dad said first. Calm, lethal. Zach laughed, nervous, defensive. Look, I get it. This is about the breakup. I understand you're angry, but sometimes people just don't. Stop, my mother cut in. We're not here about your pathetic exit. We're here about the $70,000 you stole. That shut him up. Just like that. His mouth stayed open for a moment longer before he tried to recover. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, shaking his head, eyes darting from one face to the other. I didn't steal anything. The cafe, there's just been some confusion about business accounts. Things got messy, but it's not. We have statements, I said, voice steady. Bank records. Every withdrawal. Your personal transfers. Your name on the payments. Do you want us to keep listing them? I could see it happening, the unraveling. His posture sank slightly, his hands fidgeting in his lap, one knee bouncing uncontrollably. You don't understand. The business was under stress, he muttered. I had to take temporary steps. It was never meant to be. We also know about Rachel, my dad said, slowly. And the apartment. And the money you spent taking her on vacation while we were paying off your loans. Zach's whole body went still. He didn't deny it. He just stopped speaking. You took advantage of our daughter, my mother said, her voice cracking in the middle, then hardening like stone. And then you took our money to build a life with someone else. But you're not walking away from this. He started shaking his head again, faster this time, desperate. I can fix this, he said. Let's just calm down. This doesn't have to get ugly. It's already ugly, I said. But it doesn't have to become criminal. You'll transfer full restitution. You'll hand over the keys to the cafe by end of day. And you'll film a public apology, acknowledging the fraud and the way you manipulated everyone involved. Or we go to the police, and to every news outlet that'll listen. His eyes went wide, mouth slightly open. That thin mask of charm he always wore slipping completely now. "You can't be serious," he said. "That's blackmail." "No," my dad interrupted. "It's consequences." He stood up suddenly, like his body couldn't take sitting anymore, like his only instinct was flight. "This is insane," he said, backing toward the door. "You can't trap me like this." "You already trapped yourself," I said quietly. He reached for the door. My dad moved to block it. Not with violence, not even with words. Just stood there, between Zach and the exit, until Zach backed down again. He didn't speak after that. Just stared at the floor while his hands trembled and sweat formed along his temple. We didn't stop recording. Not until he left. And even then, I didn't speak. I just closed the door behind him and locked it. Then I sat down on the floor, knees pulled to my chest, and let myself feel all of it. Not relief. Not triumph. Just the weight of what it meant to finally see the truth. Ugly, cornered, and trying to run. I almost didn't go. I had the invitation. Well, not directly. Shane sent me a message late at night. Just a screenshot of the group chat with the words, "Sunday, 6:30, family dinner at Mom's." Everyone's expected. I stared at it for a long time. The polite thing would have been to stay far away. The safe thing too. But polite and safe hadn't exactly protected me so far. And besides, Shane made it clear, Rachel would be there. So would everyone else. I didn't wear anything dramatic. Just black. Quiet, sharp lines. Like armor. The folder I carried was thicker than it needed to be, the kind of thing that made a statement before anyone even opened it. I showed up 15 minutes late, enough to be noticed, not enough to derail. When I walked through the door, the room fell into a hush so instant it felt rehearsed. Zach was at the table, wine glass in hand, mid-sentence about something. Probably a sanitized version of his cafe or his new beginnings, or whatever lie he was spinning these days. Rachel was next to him, her hand resting lightly on his knee, smiling like she believed everything he said. His mom was pouring salad dressing. Shane was already looking at me like he'd been waiting for the second I walked through that door. Zach's eyes widened when he saw me, then narrowed like he was calculating. He stood, half smiling, half bracing. "Didn't know you were invited," he said, and I couldn't tell if the edge in his voice was panic or arrogance. "I wasn't," I said, "but I brought something for the table." I dropped the folder right in the center, between the mashed potatoes and the centerpiece. Receipts, bank statements, transfer logs, loan payoff records, credit withdrawals, plane tickets, signed contracts, a printed summary with highlighted totals. $74,316. And that wasn't even counting the gifts. No one moved at first, just a slow ripple of glances. Shane reached for the folder, flipped it open, and started passing pages around the table. Zach tried to laugh. "What is this?" he asked, that familiar false confusion already leaking into his voice. "This looks like, what, some kind of fake accounting." "You know it's not," I said quietly. Rachel looked confused, then curious. She took a page, scanned it, and her expression started to change. One line, then another, then her eyes froze. This is the rent account," she said, looking at Zach. "This is our place." "Babe, don't listen to this," Zach said, voice rising, too fast. "She's trying to stir things up. She's obsessed, I pulled out my phone. One tap. The audio started to play. Crisp. Unmistakable. Zach's voice, from the meeting at my apartment. Trembling, defensive, cornered. "You don't understand. The business was under stress. It was never meant to be permanent. Rachel didn't know, okay? She thinks I have money. I needed to keep it going." You could hear my mother's voice in the background. My father naming the exact dollar amounts. Zach trying to walk it all back. Then silence. Then his breathing. Then the sound of him trying to leave. I hit pause. Rachel stood up slowly, like something inside her had broken loose. Her hand slipped off Zach's knee like it was burning. "Is this real?" she asked, voice shaking, barely a whisper. Zach didn't answer. He didn't have to. "I thought you had investors," she said. "You told me your cafe was profitable. You said your loans were paid off because you were smart with money." He started to reach for her, but she stepped back. "You bought me earrings with her parents' money," she said, louder now. "You took me to Aspen on their credit card?" "It wasn't like that," he said, and his voice cracked like glass under pressure. "Rachel, it got out of hand. I didn't know how to." "Get out," she said. He blinked. "What?" "Get out of my house," she said. "I don't care where you go. Just don't come back." His mother tried to say something, but Shane raised a hand and shook his head like even he couldn't defend this anymore. No one else moved. Zach just stood there, frozen in the middle of the room he once controlled, the lies finally louder than his charm. Rachel walked past him, grabbed her keys off the counter, opened the door, and waited. He left. No words. No goodbye. Just the quietest walk of shame I've ever seen. down a hallway full of people who now knew exactly who he was. And I didn't smile. I didn't say a word. I just sat there, listening to the silence he left behind. Filing the lawsuit didn't feel like closure. It didn't feel like justice, either. It felt like necessity, cold, mechanical, and personal. I wasn't chasing revenge. I wasn't even chasing a confession. I just wanted the truth to exist somewhere official, stamped in black ink, in a place where his charm couldn't talk its way out of accountability. My lawyers handled most of it. I sat through the meetings, signed the papers, nodded through strategy calls while everything inside me felt like static. I didn't care about his excuses. I wanted receipts, paper trails, proof. Zach tried to stall. First, he ignored it. Then he called Shane, asking if there was still a chance to work something out privately. Then came his lawyer's first proposal, some laughable settlement, half apologies, no responsibility, no mention of the money. We rejected it before the ink even dried. It wasn't until the second hearing, when the judge requested a formal accounting of all assets involved and hinted at a possible escalation to criminal charges, that something shifted. His posture in court changed. He stopped looking at the camera crews outside the courthouse. He started showing up early, clean-shaven, silent. And then one morning, I walked in and found my attorney waiting with a small envelope in her hand. He had signed everything. The deal was formal. 3 years of probation, full compensation of the $74,000 and change, plus legal fees. 200 hours of community service, no public-facing employment for the duration, and a cafe, transferred back in full to my parents' name. Every paper signed, notarized, filed. But the letter, that part wasn't required. It arrived folded, hand-delivered, sealed in an envelope addressed to me. Not Julia, not Ms. Reynolds. Just my name, like it still meant something to him. Inside was a single handwritten page, written in blue ink, his handwriting strangely neater than I remembered. He wrote that he knew what he did could never be undone, that he didn't deserve forgiveness, that he had humiliated me on purpose because he was too much of a coward to face what he'd become, that the restaurant scene was planned down to the second, and that he had staged it not just to hurt me, but to escape responsibility for the years we spent together. He admitted the money, the cafe, the loans, the vacations, the apartment. He wrote that Rachel hadn't known, that he lied to everyone, that he couldn't recognize himself anymore. He didn't ask for redemption. He didn't beg. He just wrote the truth, without filters, and signed his name at the bottom like it was a resignation. I didn't respond. I watched as the court accepted the terms. I watched the cafe deed change hands again. I watched my parents stand in front of the building they helped fund and quietly reclaim the thing he tried to take from all of us. I watched his letter get folded back into its envelope and locked away in a filing cabinet in my lawyer's office, in case we ever needed it again. But I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel powerful or vindicated. I felt tired, worn raw, like I'd finally reached the end of something so deeply broken it couldn't even shatter cleanly. But it was done. He was held accountable. And for once, the silence that followed didn't feel like grief. It felt like peace. The court ruling should have been the end. On paper, it was. The restitution was paid, the cafe returned, the service hours tracked and logged. His letter was filed, the ink dry. My name no longer tethered to his in any legal, financial, or personal way. But Zach never did know how to leave quietly. It started small. A letter left under the door of the cafe one morning, sealed in the same cream-colored envelopes he used to write anniversary notes. Just my name on the front, nothing else. Inside, more words, apologies, memories, twisted rewrites of history dressed as affection. I didn't read all of them, just enough to know he still thought this was a story he could reshape. A week later, another letter, tucked behind the register like a ghost passing through. Then he showed up, violating the restraining order like it didn't exist. I wasn't there that day, but my mother was. She didn't say a word to him, just called the police and stood by the window until he left. I thought I'd be afraid when it happened. I used to have dreams about running into him again, cold sweat kind of dreams where I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. But when it finally happened in real life, I felt nothing. No fear, no panic, just this heavy, unshakable silence inside me where something used to live. It wasn't numbness. It was clarity. He didn't have that power anymore. He tried to reframe the story online, posted some vague caption about owning mistakes and still loving someone who no longer sees you. A shaky selfie in front of the cafe, like proximity, might imply forgiveness. But if he thought the public would sympathize, he was wrong. The comments turned against him within hours. People remembered the videos, the court filings, the audio recordings. They remembered me, and they didn't buy the rebrand. Meanwhile, life kept moving. The cafe got busier. Locals showed up not just to support the food, but to support what it represented: resilience, grit, family. My parents, who once hesitated to even be called business owners, were now running staff meetings, managing inventory, and turning a profit faster than they'd expected. The space felt different now. Brighter, lighter, like something toxic had been flushed out and replaced with something clean and alive. As for me, I stopped waiting for closure. I stopped needing it. Closure implies an ending, something you hold in your hands and fold neatly away. What I got was more like truth, messy, irreversible, sharp around the edges, but mine. I didn't forgive him. I didn't want to, but I stopped carrying it. I stopped carrying him. And somewhere in that letting go, I found space to move differently. More certain, more grounded, stronger than I'd ever been, not because of what happened, but because of who I became in the aftermath.